Hi, y'all. This is Kristen Chenoweth.
Hi, I'm Gloria Stefan.
This is Sarah Bareilles.
Hi, I'm Patty Lapone.
This is Lin-Manuel Miranda. You're listening to the Broadway Podcast Network.
Hi, this is Jose Llana, and welcome to the Theater Podcast with Alan Seales.
Hey everyone, welcome to an all-new episode of the Theater Podcast with Alan Seales. I'm your host, Alan Seales, and our guest today is Jose Llana, who is currently in Here Lies Love on the Broadway stage in the Broadway Theater. Very meta, if you ask me. This episode turned into an incredibly deep history lesson. I had no clue because, we get into the reasons why typically a lot of people in America don't understand the international history that's going on in the Philippines or the things that are happening in the Philippines, whether it be history or current events, because history seems to be repeating itself. Jose is so passionate about his family and their past, and it's just all shown through the chat, and just the representation that he gets to bring to his heritage, to his family, and to what's going on, again, currently in the Philippines. It's just incredible. Can't wait to share this episode. Find me online, Instagram. I think I've given up on Twitter, X, whatever. If you still need me there, let me know, but I think I'm done with it. So Instagram, TikTok, Threads, hit me up. Let me know that you're listening. And everybody now, enjoy this episode with Jose Llana.
Here you go. 1, 2, 3.
Today's guest has been gracing the Broadway stage now for over 2 decades, having appeared in both the 1996 and 2015 revivals of The King and I. He has also appeared in Rent, Street Corner Symphony, Flower Drum Song, Wonderland, Spelling Bee, which earned him a Drama Desk Award. TV and film credits include Sex and the City, Hitch, and Unconscious, and he can now be seen tearing up the dance floor on the Broadway stage again as President Marcos in Here Lies Love. Jose Llana, welcome to the Theater Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, on these episodes, I often will get into what I will call the basic information of, like, where did you grow up? What got you into theater and all this stuff? But the where did you grow up is taking us straight into, I think, a much deeper conversation. So let's kind of start with that, and I'll let you set the stage, no pun intended, as to how that all began.
Okay. Well, I was born in the Philippines. I was born, my older sister and I were born in the mid-'70s in the Philippines, and during martial law. And it became very clear to my parents, who were hot-blooded activists against martial law, that it was not a great place to raise their kids. So they tried very hard to find jobs in America. And my mom found one first, and we moved to New York City in '79. And then a year later, we moved to Virginia. So I grew up in a suburb of Washington, D.C., and that's where I grew up.
Like Fairfax area?
Yeah, Fairfax County, exactly.
Yeah,
Fairfax County, Springfield, Virginia. Springfield, Virginia is where I grew up, and I'm a product of the public school system of Northern Virginia. Very proudly. Went to a math and science high school, magnet school, TJ, Thomas Jefferson High School, and then I made my way to New York City.
So math and science high school automatically means you're good at singing and dancing and acting, right?
Of course. Actually, I always say I lucked out. My senior year in high school in particular, we, math and science, math in particular is very connected to music. Music, people who are good at math, music makes sense. There's a lot of rules and there's a lot of connection between music and science, and to be honest. And so, but I benefited greatly that my sister was older than me. And she did everything right. She went to all the engineering schools. She got a full scholarship at MIT and became a badass engineer.
Wow!
Which allowed her little brother to be the artist in the family.
like we got one. The other one can do what they want.
Absolutely. And I always say, if my sister and I were born in different orders, I'd be the engineer and she'd be on Broadway singing and dancing.
Did she ever have any desire, inclination to follow that path either?
It's weird. I know that sometimes, like whenever she sees my shows, she's the most supportive sister on the planet. She'll always want to talk about the dancers. She was a dancer in high school, and and who knows, but like I said, it's hard to even say, like, how different would I be if I were born first and I had the weight of responsibility that immigrant parents place on the firstborn child. And My sister got all of that, and I was given free reign to do whatever I wanted. So it's the privilege of the younger siblings that get to be the artists. So
Yeah, my younger brother, he got to get away with everything. I always joke around that I broke in my parents for my brother.
absolutely, it's actually very true.
Yeah, because by the time he got caught sneaking in late at night, they were like, "Oh, okay, this is what kids do. That's fine."
Absolutely, absolutely.
But at what point, though? I mean, you obviously there's very strong tie over between math and music and dancing because it's rhythm and counts and things like this. But at what point was there a touchstone or a moment when you're like, I'm going to try to do this professionally? I want to keep going, or was it like just accepting opportunity after opportunity?
I mean, I think I'm the typical story of, well, not I don't want to say typical, but like the Filipinos are born with a karaoke mic in their hands. Everyone sings at gatherings. Everyone is a singer, and so I grew up singing just like, and my dad, I grew up listening to my dad sing with his guitar in the living room every Saturday and Sunday morning on the weekends. And then the karaoke machines would come out during family gatherings and Filipino gatherings. And then in high school, really in middle school, I discovered musical theater. I discovered Broadway. And there was kind of no turning back at that point. And I think a major, and you can't understate the importance of Lea Salonga winning the Tony Award for Miss Saigon in 1990. I was actually, when did she win? 89, 90? I was in middle school, high school during that time, and I was just beginning to get obsessed with musical theater. I was obsessed with Les Mis. I was obsessed with Miss Saigon. And to watch Lea Salonga win this award, it propelled a lot of people like myself who were Filipinos to go, maybe I can go to New York. And one of my goals was to get into Miss Saigon. And the fact that I never got into Miss Saigon is and that other shows happened first. But I think that was definitely a touchstone. And then 10 years later, I would end up working with Lea and now working with Lea again, and Here Lies Love. So I think you can't understate how important it was that Lea Salonga put Filipinos on kind of the global map at that point in terms of singers. And I very much came to New York with that kind of inspiration. And I think, I got very lucky. I came into New York City at a time when rock and roll and contemporary musical theater was beginning to hit. And I think the fact that my career has kind of bounced between legit theater and rock theater, and it was just the music that I grew up with, and I was able to straddle both kind of in the beginning of my career. Sort of gave me a versatility that was really helpful in auditioning. Like I could go from The King and I to go do Rent, back to Flower Drum Song, and then Wonderland. So it's, I think, and Street Corner Symphony was like a Motown review. So I mean, I just tried to sing whatever was put in front of me.
That's fascinating. I didn't ultimately realize how strong the connection was between the Filipino culture and karaoke until actually it was mentioned in Here Lies Love, right?
Absolutely.
Which is kind of the basis behind the whole set design in the first place.
Absolutely. It's weird. Like growing up as a Filipino, it's, you don't think about it. It's because it's just a fact. Everyone sings. The karaoke machine is there at every party, and it's not even there's a level of showing off, like who are the better singers, like and every family always has like their best singers, and every family has like the shame of like Uncle Roy can't sing, it's like there's that shame, right? But I remember being a little kid and being annoyed that my uncles were stealing all the good cassette tapes with all the male songs, and they wouldn't let the kids have them. And so I remember like the first couple of songs I sang in karaoke were like Whitney Houston songs, because they weren't any boy songs left because all my uncles were saving it for themselves. No, I mean, I think karaoke, well, first of all, I grew up with calling it -1. A lot of Filipinos call it -1 as opposed to karaoke.
I've never heard that.
Yeah, -1 is you would buy -1 cassette tapes, and it meant it was -1 track. You minus the vocal track.
Minus the singer, yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up singing -1, and then by the time I got to high school, people were like, "You guys do a lot of karaoke." I'm like, "What's karaoke?" Filipinos, a lot of Filipinos I grew up with, we call it -1, and so it makes sense. Those books that give advice to international business people. It's like in Japan, you hand your business card like this and you present it, and in certain different countries that you have to go by their traditions and their cultures. The business advice usually is, if you are doing business in the Philippines, you will eventually be asked to go to dinner and then the karaoke machine will come out. Do not refuse to sing, or else you will be seen as someone who is conceited.
Wow.
And that's kind of true. It's like when people pass around the karaoke mic, it's like, all right, everyone sings something, and I think that's a part of the culture of no one makes a fool of themselves. If you do, then it's okay. That means we're all going to make fun of each other, and there's a beautiful familial feeling about that. And if you're nervous about singing, it's okay. Get over it, and we're all going to feel silly. And I think that's a beautiful part of the culture.
Do you have a go-to karaoke song where it's just like someone throws the mic at you, now everything's digital at your fingertips, you're like, all right, call up such and such from this?
It's funny. Filipinos, we're never caught off guard when they ask what's your go-to karaoke song. I have like 3. It's like, depending on different decades of my life, and people always keep that song in the back of their head that they know that they can whip out and get the crowd going, and depending on the crowd, it's like, I don't want to show off. I don't want to. How about a fun song to pick everybody up?
You got to build it up a little bit. So what do you start with? Like, energy's kind of medium. Everyone's this is America, so everyone is a little bit trepidatious. They're embarrassed. So how do you get it going? What do you go to?
Well, I always go to like my middle school and high school songs. I always go to like George Michael, Freedom 90, or Belle Biv DeVoe's Poison. You know what I mean? Like silly songs that everyone's like, oh my God, I know that song. Let's sing along, or like the really cheesy love ballads from the 80s, like Peter Cetera, from Karate Kid 2, things like that. I mean, again, my goal for karaoke is to have fun and be silly, not necessarily to show off how great a singer I am. And I think that's the fun part of karaoke. I
wish that corporate America, a key emphasis on America, would incorporate this this tradition, because it was 2 weeks ago. I was out at a business event and karaoke was brought out by the singers in the group. Okay. And there were managers who didn't sing, and people who aren't used to it, and so they're like, it was so painful to watch them try to refuse, but then they were like, fine, and caving into peer pressure, and then picking songs that were so inappropriate, not only for them but for the corporate. Yeah, like one of my managers picked "Baby Got Back," which if you actually look at those lyrics, they're not right. Not for corporate.
Yeah, know your audience. Know your
audience and know your lyrics. Yeah, I think that's the lesson. And then, but the family though, has your family been able to come see Here Lies Love?
Oh, absolutely. They saw it a bunch of times down when we were at the Public, and they were all there for opening night. My mom, my dad, my stepdad, my stepmom, my sister, her husband, the kids, and no, they've been very much. First of all, my family and I are very close. Like, yeah. It's just my mom, my dad, my sister, and me. And then my parents got divorced when I was 10, and they're both remarried. And I'm very close to my stepdad and my stepmom. And so I have a large family. My mom and dad have always been super, super supportive of their artist, younger child. And this show has been very cathartic for all of us. I think, like I said, we came here to escape martial law. Yeah. But my parents, Filipino Americans are one of two. There are either one of two camps. You either come here and you leave everything behind, because Filipinos are the masters of assimilation. You said we're going to be Americans now. We're not going to speak Filipino and Tagalog at home. Our kids are going to be raised here, and they're going to not have accents. And we're just going to move forward. And that's okay. Like that's a lot of people. A lot of people do that. And Filipinos are very good at assimilating. My parents were of the other camp, where they kept a very Filipino household. They spoke Tagalog at home. My sister and I grew up understanding Tagalog, and we have a hard time speaking it now, just we're not immersed in it. But if someone is speaking Tagalog to me, I'll completely understand what they're saying, which I'm so grateful for. But the most important thing they did was they raised my sister and me with the full knowledge of why we left the Philippines, that it was not it was a hard choice, and what martial law was, and what we were watching on the TV, the news reports that we were watching, and explaining what it was about. Because we were in my suburban living room in Virginia watching all the protest rallies and watching Ninoy Aquino flying home to the Philippines in 1983 and watching the assassination and understanding why that was horrible. And the image of him on the tarmac was burned in my brain as a kid. And so, when I told them that I was going to be a part of this musical 11 years ago, this workshop of a new musical, they were a little suspicious. They were like, "Why?" But first of all, I thought I wanted to. I came into this audition thinking I wanted to go play a Ninoy. I walked into that audition room and demanded to be seen for Ninoy Aquino so I could make my parents proud that I was going to play this hero. And I wanted to work with David, and I wanted to work with Alex, and obviously at the public too. And I guess my authoritative voice demanding to play Ninoy made them think maybe this guy may be better playing the president. Well, no, we'll see. So from day one working on the show, my parents and I have had an open conversation about it. And I made it very clear to the production and to the creative team that if we ever veered in a direction of glorifying the Marcoses and presenting them in any positive light, that I was going to walk away from the project. And they respected that. And they went the completely other direction. They said, tell us about your family, tell us about your parents, that then we can maybe help shape this piece and know what we want to say with this piece. And so I've never been more intimately involved in the creation of a piece. David wrote this music before we ever met.
David Byrne,
yeah. But once we got in a rehearsal room with Alex and we started telling stories and perspectives about what the stories that we were telling, I feel very much my DNA is in this piece, and I've been part of this project every step of the way.
We're going to take a short break. Stay tuned for more of the episode.
Tell me more about that, because this is the first time I've heard that the show came together. I guess the script came together based on a collaboration of personal stories from those of you who either lived through it or were directly descendant of it, right? Mm-hmm. So what was that like? I mean, so you're coming in to audition for a role that they don't really know how to tell yet?
I mean, because the original concept album, there was only one Marcos song, which is the big song, the Perfect Hand song that has stayed with the piece. But in the concept album, there was no Aquino song. There really wasn't, And so, because the original concept album focused almost entirely on Imelda and Estrella, the nanny, the housekeeper nanny that she grew up with, and that was pretty much the primary focus. It was almost all their songs, and there were three songs that are no longer part of the show, but were basically Imelda when she was a child, and so when to transition from concept album to theater piece, and once you have Alex Timbers along and Oscar Eustis at the Public Theater, who's like the king of dramaturgs, I think when they were beginning to shape it, they realized the story that they wanted to tell was this triangle. It had to involve Marcos a little bit more than there was on the concept album, and it definitely had to bring in Ninoy Aquino and make him a pivotal part of the story, because he wasn't part of the original concept album. And so I think sharing my stories with my family, and I think just understanding the background of, and also to understanding too that there are different perspectives from people who stayed in the Philippines and lived through martial law, and people like myself and my family, the Filipino Americans, who left and raised their kids as Americans, and here we are trying to find perspective on our Filipino history from different sides of the of the Pacific. Do you know what I mean? And I think this, like I've always said, that Here Lies Love is a testament to the workshop process, that every step of the way, from that first workshop at the Public in 2011, even before I was involved, David had that concert in Carnegie Hall, and I think he realized that was not the direction he wanted to go. And then when he finally got connected with Alex and Oscar Eustis at the Public Theater, then it became a theatrical piece that was coming closer and closer to what David always had in mind, which was telling the story in a disco. I can't imagine being in that room that like 15 years ago, and he was like, "I want to tell a story in a disco setting," and you're like, "Oh, sure, that'll never fly."
I'm gonna tell the story of martial law and with karaoke and disco. Yeah.
So it was just we had that first workshop, and it was in the little tiny black box at NYU. There were only, I believe, 9 actors, and we just literally did the first 8 songs of the show. And at that point, the first 8 songs were still 3 songs when Imelda was young, and then we didn't get to and the Ninoy character had this new song that didn't last past that workshop. It was definitely an experiment, that song, and it didn't pass that experiment. And I remember that first workshop ended with the line dance and the wedding. I don't know. It was bizarre, right? And everyone felt like something was interesting, but it hadn't fully formed what it was yet, And then a couple months later, I got a call saying we're going to do a second workshop, and we're going to keep going with the next 8 songs in the cycle. And I walked into that room, and there was maybe just 1 or 2 people who were there from the previous workshop, including Ruthie. Ruthie and I were both found for that first workshop. And then there was a whole slew of other people. There was a new Ninoy. And so every step along the way, they made huge strides. And then that second workshop, I believe Peter Negrini and the projections got more involved. And we just really started thinking, oh, this telling the story in basically, like even in the black box in NYU, we were standing amongst the invited audience. He invited 30 people in that little black box, and we were telling the story around them. And I had this little camcorder in my hand for perfect hand, and it was bizarre, but it was the genesis of where we are now. And I consider it an absolute privilege that, like, as an actor, that I have distinct memory of every step of the way of this piece, and the mistakes and the trials and the experimentation that happened between 2011 and now. It's such a thrill to be able to see it finally reach the finish line. And so Mass Mocha, when we went to Williamstown Theater Festival and presented the full piece there, was a huge leap forward in terms of the understanding what the piece was. Dave Corrins came in and built this behemoth of a set. The platforms were much taller in Mass Mocha. They were like shoulder height.
Oh, really?
Ultra dangerous and ultra heavy. And I think that was in itself was really experimentation. And we had only 7 performances at Mass Mocha. And even then, we still had those 3 songs in the beginning. And I remember when we moved to the Public the next year, Oscar Eustis basically said, cut those 3 songs, get to the point. Let's get to Manila right away. And I think it's stuff like that was like, at first we're cutting 3 songs. Oh no. But it changed everything to finally get to the point of the story. And Clint Ramos has been involved with it even before that. And Annie B. Parsons, like, just to do her choreography and all the different iterations, it's just been a thrill.
When did Leia come in as a producer?
I believe for the Broadway production, I think her name was thrown. I mean, again, I'm only speculating because obviously I wasn't involved in those talks. But from what I gather, when the rumblings were happening, and the rumblings have been happening on and off for the past 10 years, right?
Yeah.
But the latest rumbling started mid-COVID, because there were plans to happen that were very serious. January of 2020, I got a phone call in January of 2020, and it's like this is happening, and we're revving up for later in the year or next year.
Wait, was this pre or post January 6th?
Oh, post.
That's
pre. No,
Oh.
January 6th happened while we were in COVID. I'm talking about before COVID. We were all.
Oh, you were ready to you were okay. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So January 2020, we were all ready to go, and then COVID happened. And and it was one more thing. Because we were almost ready to go in 2017. We were almost all ready to go in 2014, and every time there was just the it just didn't happen. And for a plethora of reasons. But Leia became involved, I believe, after the talks began again after COVID. I think the producers now, and at this point, Jose Antonio Vargas and has joined the producing team, and Clint Ramos went from being our costume designer only to also one of our lead producers. I think there were big conversations about what can we do with this show that will reach out to the Filipino community. And obviously, the dream was to have Leia involved in some capacity, and I think her coming in as the guest artist for Aurora was a stroke of genius, because every night when she sings that song, it brings down the house, and it solidifies what we always know, and just the importance of that song, and the fact that we are putting such an important song in the hands of the legend that is Lea Salonga, that is purposeful, and that resonates with the audience. And then I believe when she came on, they began talking about whether she wanted to come on as a producer as well, and having that, or not her just being as a performer, but as a producer, really resonates with a lot of Filipinos, particularly the Filipinos who are in Manila, who are not Filipino American, but specifically just Filipino. It legitimizes the show in a way that's very specific and personal to people who have any doubt that the show might be something that is not respectful to the Filipino culture, and not honoring our history, or honoring the way we want to tell the story.
I was gonna ask about I guess just making it personal, because it seems like everywhere I read, there is another cast member coming out with their own story that, or people coming in and getting attached to it, who have these backstories and these experiences with being first generation, or immigrating themselves, or like yourself, that their family literally is a product of the story that you're retelling 8 times a week. And so I guess for your own kind of mental health, right? You're playing somebody that so many people most accurately and appropriately despise.
Right.
And I mean, he is a real dictator. And see what I did there? And so I guess now well, there's multiple parts to this question, because I'm kind of all over the place in what I'm thinking. But for you playing a bad person, again, your parents come to see it, and this is kind of what I was getting at originally, was are they able to separate the person that you're playing from you? Or because I hear stories sometimes of actors who play bad people on TV, and then fans come up and they're like, "I hate you, you suck."
Absolutely.
Yeah. So is that there at all?
That happened. That did happen, and something that Alex Timbers decided to do helped shift that. First of all, it still happens, and I am fine with that. If you come to our show and you leave and you see me on the street, and my portrayal of Marcos makes you that uncomfortable, then I think I've done my job.
Yeah.
I think that is fine. I have plenty of other people in my life who can show me love. Someone who comes to the theater and sees me portray Marcos and decides to not want to talk to me and kind of hate me from afar, I'm cool with that. I'm absolutely cool with that. One thing that Alex Timbers did, because the first week of previews, there were situations where in the curtain call, I would come out from my bow and the applause would diminish.
Wow.
And there was a definite feeling in the audience of, we don't want to applaud this guy. And it hurt. That's hard, to be honest, as an actor, and you're finishing your show and you're taking your curtain call. And then later, 20 minutes later, I'm leaving the stage door, and I see people literally recoil when I come out. That hurt, but that's fine. Like I said, if I've done my job. But Alex Timbers said, we're going to change that. I think we want you guys to bow as the actors that you are, not the characters that you just portrayed. So it was a very simple change. Conrad Ricamora and I changed from our character costumes into street clothes. Well, not street clothes. They're basically like contemporary clothes in the same color scheme. Like mine are still black and he's still in white, but we're not Marcos and we're not, Ninoy in the curtain call. And it made a huge difference.
Wow.
It made a huge difference. And they also added Conrad, Ariel, and myself and Leia to the final song, God Draw Straight. And we all are basically, take it as you will, you either see us as ensemble village people, but it's a separation. We're no longer Imelda, Ninoy, and Marcos. We are part of the ensemble, part of the cast. And then the curtain call is after that. It was very helpful for me to do that because then I got a warm response in my curtain call, as opposed like people were applauding, thankfully, the actor and not the character that I was playing. And I could feel it instantly when I left the theater at the stage door. But listen, I'm okay playing a villain. I've played villains in the past. It's okay. They're sometimes they're the juiciest parts.
Mm-hmm.
There's sometimes, and he is the villain of my family history. My parents would tell me stories about him and the trail of death and destruction that this man has left behind is still being felt today.
Yeah.
And researching this part, I researched him, even though his recorded history is so full of falsehoods and invented truths, and because that's just how he played. He was a smart man who knew that he could write his own history. So he wrote this journal every day that was semi-true. So like when they found his journal, people were like, dates are wrong. Like he wrote it, but even him writing in his daily journal knew that someone was going to find it someday. So he would like invent things in his journal. Like this is how this man thought. And so this kind of self-important, I'm going to make a mark in this world, arrogance and ego. I didn't have to look any further than like looking at contemporary examples like Trump and Putin.
Yeah.
It's like, it's real. And like that's the same version of these people, these men usually, but these people exist in cycles in history. Like it's the same. They're all the same. They're literally all the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so in terms of what I played differently, I think Conrad and I have been asked frequently, because we are reprising roles that we played 10 years ago. We both have gone on to play other roles in between the two projects, and that have only strengthened what we do. Like I went to go play the King of Siam for a couple of years, and I think finding the strength and power of being the king has only helped me find the ego of playing Ferdinand, and being a little older and being more secure and not needing to eager to please like maybe as I was when I was younger. And I think my confidence in the piece has only increased in the 10 years since we did it the first time.
We're going to take a short break. Stay tuned for more of the episode.
So I think playing the villain is fine for me. My dad has a harder time than my mom. My mom, I'm always going to be my mom's little boy, and so she's easier. She sees me more easily as her son playing a part.
Yeah.
But my dad, I sometimes I get a little angry at politics, and I'm the kind of guy who curses at the television when something on the news happens. I get that from my dad. He's a hot-headed activist, and he was at those protest rallies a lot more than my mom was, and so I think he's proud of me, and he's proud that we're telling the story. But it's hard for him sometimes to know that his handsome young boy is going around playing the guy that he hates. So,
but the silver lining, I think, is that by playing this guy that he hates, you're bringing to light, you're bringing to the surface a story that so many people, myself included, did not know before. Yeah. I mean, or maybe we had heard a little bit of or something, or we're like, oh man, this is January 6th insurrection. Well, that almost happened, but it didn't, so we're okay. Like,
Right.
we're not, because just like you said,
Exactly.
it's going to happen again and again and again. So we need to know how to
Right.
deal with it, and we need to learn from the past.
Absolutely. And I think, I'm watching, just this morning I was watching, obviously Trump is being indicted again today, and he's showing up to the court. His playbook that he's been having, the whole insurrection, January 6th, the playbook with January 6th, if you do the research that I've done and looked up all the different attempts that Marcos made to stay in power when he realized he was in the beginning of his second term as president,
Mm-hmm.
he only had 4 years left. He literally was like, maybe we'll change to a parliamentary system, and I'll name myself prime minister. Then I could be prime minister forever. He literally had all these options because he was petrified that once his second term ended, that he would be useless and not be able to run for president again. And so he created all these situations where there were riots. There was a bombing, and he said the bombing was done by this party, even though the vast majority of people who were killed in the bombing were of that party, and so he wanted to create all this mayhem and violence so that he would have to declare martial law. And if you're listening closely to all this Trump stuff and all this January 6th and the fake electors, they were expecting January 6th to happen.
Yeah.
They were expecting it to happen so that someone had to declare martial law.
Yeah.
And that was one of his options. And so when people say like, oh my God, things that happened in the Philippines in 1970, that'll never happen. Well, it's happening all over the place. And it's a playbook that dictators and wannabe dictators know works. And so the sad truth, though, is that, once Marcos was kicked out of the Philippines, it didn't mean a lot of his supporters were not still in power in different levels of government in the Philippines. The most important people that were in power were the people who were in charge of the educational system. So a bunch of Marcos supporters have been in charge of the educational system in the Philippines for the past 45 years. And because of that, if you look at the textbooks and history books that have been taught to the public school system in the Philippines ever since martial law, they don't talk about martial law. So you have entire generations of Filipinos who martial law is something that their grandparents talk about, but they don't know anything about it. So now this guy is running for president, and the only thing they have to know about martial law is on Facebook, because 99% of the Filipinos are on Facebook now. They don't watch the news. They only click on it's maddening.
So is there any mention of the People Power Revolution in these textbooks?
Yes, but then they kind of gloss over what the People Power Revolution was for. It was like, oh, they toppled the government that they didn't agree with anymore. But the fact is that like martial law and the horrible things that happen in martial law and the billions of dollars stolen has not been taught. And so now you have these young people who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s who have grown up with social media, are being spoon-fed false information about what those years were about. And that's exactly how Bongbong Marcos got elected. And it's part of the playbook of, and I always want to recommend it. Maria Ressa, who's the Nobel Peace Prize winning journalist who founded Rappler.com, she lays it all out in her book. It's called How to Stand Up to a Dictator. And it's about the Duterte election and how Facebook is ravaging the educational system, and it's ravaging Filipinos' ability to make good decisions about who to elect to office. And it was a huge, huge help in my research about understanding, yes, I'm playing a guy who, took over the Philippines 50 years ago, but it could happen again. And trying to understand where Filipinos are today, why my parents who are retired look at the Philippines now and the government there and are just frustrated because they're just exhausted by the whole thing. Because all the work that they did 60 years ago, it's kind of all crumbling.
Well, even locally, in our own country now, in America. If you had not said you were talking about Marcos, I could have assumed any number of different people actively in the news today.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and that's just sad. It's interesting, and I want to get your kind of educated guess on this. But I just finished a podcast yesterday, called Run, Hide, Repeat, about somebody's whose entire family up until I think their late 30s was disrupted by this guy who lived this complete delusion his whole adult life. And it's called it's a type of psychotic disorder called delusional disorder, very simply put, where you literally make up this entire elaborate story about what is happening, and could be something like, I'm being spied on, so I can't go in this room because there's spy things here. But anyway, so they moved their family around Canada their entire child life because all of a sudden they were found, and then they had to move again, right? Wow. And then everybody else in that circle starts to believe it so wholeheartedly because it's so seemingly impossible that it's not totally. What am I trying to say?
Right.
It's improbable, but it's not impossible. And so there's always a shred of truth.
Their baseline of truth has been shifted so often that they can't see beyond what that baseline has
right.
been.
So I guess my question for you then is people like Marcos, or even like our former president or Putin or whoever it is do you think there's a part of a delusion that's there where they genuinely believe it, or is it all ego where they just have to, or a combination of the two, right? Where they just have to be like,
it's definitely a combination of the two, and I think it's a good, also a reminder that our show actually is about Imelda.
Yes, that is true. That is true.
And I bring that up because she is the perfect example of delusion. And I think if a psychologist or a psychiatrist actually sat her down and talked to her, there's a level of delusion that would kind of classify her as slightly deranged in the sense that she truly believes, and I don't think it's ego necessarily, but she truly believes that she was placed on this earth by God.
Well, it's like her reference, people like that around them, their reference is so shifted that that's what they have to believe because they don't know any different.
Absolutely. And I've always felt that if I had to compare Marcos and Imelda comes from a little bit of a delusion where she was this molded clay that was shoved in directions, and it created a world for her that was a creation of delusion. Basically, Marcos, I don't think was delusional. I think he was more calculated, and I think he was a criminal.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that people that even amongst them, the many people who have differing opinions about Marcos, it is a fact that when he was young, as a young man living in the northern province of the Philippines, his father was a politician. His father was running for mayor against a rival. The rival won. Marcos and his uncle killed that rival and then was sent to jail and prison. While he was in prison, he got his law degree, Marcos, and stood before a judge and convinced the judge to let him off. And the judge literally wrote down, "This man is so smart and so charismatic, we cannot let him rot in jail. He must be set free to be someone important for this country to lead."
He's a snake oil salesman.
It's absolutely. So that is literally the genesis of so Marcos basically learned very young in life, I can do what the hell I want as long as I can get myself out of it. And he was always one of the smartest people in the room, and he had a photographic memory. He could memorize speeches. So when I compare Marcos and Imelda, Marcos is always smart and calculated, and Imelda is kind of like the delusional, like everyone tells her she's beautiful, everyone tells her that she's put on this earth to be gorgeous, and so there's two very different despots here, two very different approaches to the world. And I think what's beautiful about Here Lies Love is that we get to live in that world of Imelda, and Imelda's world is that disco, where she takes these trips with these world leaders, and she gets hurt by Marcos, and she goes, and allows me, from my character study for Marcos, I try to control her as much as I can, and I try to control the situation as much as I can, and that's what I do when I'm on stage. But the frustrating thing with Marcos is that he got sick, and that he was not able to keep control. And so, to answer your question, I don't think he was delusional, but I think it was a lot of ego. Marcos was walking ego, and I think I don't compare him to Trump as much as I compare him to Putin.
Yeah,
I think Putin is definitely someone who is smart, who has the ego and the need for power. He's had power now for a very long time, and he doesn't want to let go. And I think also too, and I don't want to play into conspiracy theories here, but I think he's also sick right now, and I think there's a lot of stuff that's trying to cover up that he is. And so I think the when I try to make connections to contemporary leaders, Putin is so easy to connect to. Particularly, they're like photos of themselves bare chested on horses and working out in gyms that Marcos had
bears
taken. Yeah. So
there's that famous picture of Putin on a bear or whatever. I don't even know if that's real. I need a Snopes.com that one. This is fascinating. You're right. And the show does center around Imelda, and you're absolutely right, because the beginning of Here Lies Love, like, it goes through the whole beauty pageant scene, because people, and especially women of that time, are treated in a certain way, and
Absolutely.
then they only find their value by continuing. Again, it's you're presented with a reality, and if you have no perspective on how it can be different, and there was no social media, there was no internet really at that point, right? And that's all you know, and you're like, if you're told your entire life, well, you have to be pretty to stay relevant, and then you have no ability to make decisions to keep power other than just like. Yeah, you see what I'm saying? It's like, I totally see how she became delusional, especially when married to a complete psychopath.
Absolutely. And then they had access to all the money they ever wanted.
Yeah.
And they were basically told you can do whatever the hell you want to do. I mean, what that does to someone's psyche, and not to let her off the hook. I mean, the woman is deplorable. Like she chooses to live in her delusion. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think it's I don't want to say that she's delusional but by any means to let her off any hook here. Like, the woman is calculating. The woman knows who she is. The woman knows the money that they stole. There's a part of her that knows it's stolen, but it's still hers.
Like, I earned it because I stole it.
I mean, because normal people don't pack diamonds in diaper bags when they're leaving their house. Like, it's just.
Hey, speak for yourself.
There's a level of criminality there that's just in plain sight here. Like, if you thought it was really yours, why are you hiding jewels in diaper bags when you're leaving? I just didn't. So things like that are just. And what's frustrating too, and the same way, like this morning, I'm watching the news, and 70% of GOP voters still believe that Trump is innocent. Like, there's a level to me, like, that when I see people who are still massive Marcos supporters, it's still frustrating, because like you said, like, these people live in a different reality. They live in a different world where they've been told a falsehood so often, and their grandparents lived it and their parents lived it, that it's their baseline.
We're going to take a short break. Stay tuned for more of the episode.
Marcos support in the Philippines has never waned. I kind of call it's been not dissimilar to kind of like the white supremacy problem in America, where it's never gone away. It's just they just didn't talk about it.
Right.
And now with Trump back in power, they've just found they're more empowered to say things out loud than the things that they always thought but never talked about. The Marcos supporters are finding that power right now. Like, they've been here forever. They've been around since Marcos was kicked out. Now they can finally go to a party and go, oh, I've been a Marcos supporter since they left 50 years ago. And that's what's frightening. That is what is the most frightening, because those people have maintained positions of power both in the Philippines and in America. Because a lot of people came to America with suitcases full of cash. You know, when they could tell that Marcos was about to be kicked out, there were planes full of Filipinos who were like, let's get the hell out of here. Take all the suitcases of cash that Marcos gave us to keep quiet, and let's go buy a house in America and not talk about it for anymore. There are a lot of people who got very wealthy off the Marcoses, and to be honest, a lot of their kids and grandkids have no idea. So, you know, and so there are populations of Filipino Americans who are here second, third generation, who, you know, had a nice head start as immigrants. You know, they came here and were able to buy a house right away and go to private schools maybe, and they've never asked their parents what made us so well off when we came to America, because they just didn't want to talk about it.
Or maybe they know and they don't, or they have an idea and they don't want to know, because then it would mean that they can't enjoy it.
Which is why sometimes it's hard for a lot of people to talk about the show. And because, you know, whether or not you were for Marcos or against Marcos, martial law was a traumatic experience for everybody, except the rich people. But like, it was a traumatic experience, you know, and no matter how well it ended with the People Power Revolution, there was still 20 years of trauma involved in it. And I have to remind myself of that as much as good as it is that we're telling this story and we're getting people to talk about it, it can be very hard for some people to talk about.
I can't believe it's 20 years though. I mean, because in another multiverse, another version of the multiverse, January 6th was successful and we have a dictator in America, right? And it would just be the beginning. We had 4 years, thankfully not 8. And 20 years. I remember I was 23. How old am I now? I was 22. And I can't remember how old I am. I was 22. I had the world ahead of me. Everything was great. And I cannot imagine going through the last 20 years just fearful to walk outside. Like that's really serious stuff. And I'm just like, I'm thankful to you and the cast and everybody for educating us dumbass Americans, speaking for myself, on these stories that happen outside. Because even in America, like, again, the victors write the history books, but we learn very little. Even in public school growing up, I learned so little about international history. And then on the news today,
so much to learn,
yeah, there's so much to learn.
And also two things that I've had to learn as a Filipino American, which clearly I was not taught in American schools, was the enormous the enormous American interference and involvement at the beginning of Filipino creation, Filipino government. Like, we went from being like, the joke is that Filipinos were not a country at all until the Spaniards came. We were basically a bunch of island tribes that traded with each other and spoke different languages. Right? And then Spain came and said, look at all you people living near each other. We're going to call you a country. We're going to name you Filipinos after King Philip of Spain. And we're going to be in charge for the next 400 years. We're going to make you Catholic. And we're going to systematically rename all of you from your tribal names to Spanish names. Right? So for 400 years, we were a colony of Spain. And then suddenly, when Spain's colonizing started, falling apart, the Americans came in and said, we'll free you, but we're going to be in charge, and we're going to give you a government that's basically a copy and paste of our Constitution. But every president that you elect is going to be the guy that we want, because we need you guys to let us have these 3 naval bases here forever and ever. And so, like, if you look at the history, like, the Filipinos don't really celebrate the first 4 presidents of our history, because they were kind of just little
figureheads.
Yeah, my mom and dad will kill me for saying this, but like, they were basically, American military pawns. They were there as like, oh, he'll get elected president, but we control him. Which is exactly why when Marcos got elected in 1965, the Philippines was still a very young country. We were only really independent for 60 years at that point. He came in with this whole notion of nationalism and said, we are Filipinos. I'm going to stand up for us, and we're going to get this and get that. And people like my parents, who were freshmen in college in 1965, were like, this guy, he's smart. We're going to vote for him. and he won in a landslide. And then within just 4 years of his first term, things turned so sour, and so much money was stolen, and it radicalized a lot of young people like my parents and said, this guy's dangerous. And then boom, 2 years after that, martial law was declared. So it's like, it can happen so quickly, so quickly. But most Filipinos don't understand the involvement of American politics and military in Filipino history. Which is why we start the show with American Troglodyte. Like, you can't talk about Filipino history without talking about American involvement. Like, the first line we say in the show is, "Did you know that the Philippines bought the America from the Spanish for $20 million?"
Yeah,
that's exactly true.
Yeah.
It's exactly true.
You need to be an adjunct history professor at something around here. Like, I had no clue this episode was going to go this deep into history, and I feel like I could continue to talk for another 5 hours. Like, this has been so enlightening, and
well, thanks.
It's phenomenal. I love learning this stuff, and
that would make my parents very proud that you said that. It was also just 12 years of research for a job. You know what I mean?
But still, you're passionate about it.
It's very personal, right? Like, I love that I've done all this research, but it's like I was embarrassed. I said, 10 years ago, I said I should know more of this. Like, I'm an adult Filipino American man. I need to know more of my history. Like, why don't I know enough of this? And so I've hopefully found out more and had a better perspective on the whole thing, and be able to talk about it is really important.
Well, I think you should teach. I don't know. Do some. You could do like a weekly or a semi, like every couple days or something. Like, just post a little history lesson on TikTok, or on Instagram Reels. I don't know, somewhere where you're like your Filipino fact of the day. That would be cool. All right, so let's wrap up the episode with 3 questions I ask everyone to close it out. Just the very first question simply is, what motivates you?
What motivates me is my family, and making them proud, and my husband, making him proud. I think the older I get and the more I work, it becomes less about my own personal ego, and things like opening night. I had them all there for opening night, and I live for making my sister proud, making my parents proud, and making my husband proud.
I can tell it comes through with everything you're talking about. Yeah. What advice would you give to your younger self and younger people listening now, starting out down a similar path?
Relax. I think, again, I always think it's a good thing and a bad thing that the immigrant mentality of like, time is running out. You gotta do everything. I think I spent way too much of my 20s stressed out about time, and not getting the right this and not doing the right that, and I think I didn't enjoy myself as much. I think even when things were going well, I was stressing out about the next job. And I think I would tell them to stop and enjoy where you are, even if it's not perfect, but there's always something to learn about where you are. So
beautiful. Okay. Last question, hardest one. If you can see only one show for the rest of your life, but you can see it as many times as you want, what would you see?
Oh, we're talking about a musical theater show? Like,
sure. Interpret it how you will, but we'll go with musical theater since you said that.
Oh, okay. Wow, God, that is hard. You know what? I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna go back on the show thing. I'm gonna say a movie.
Okay.
And it's a movie that I go back to over and over again, and it's When Harry Met Sally. It's
Any
weird.
particular scene?
It was one of the first movies I was obsessed with as a kid, and it was very New York to me. And it was about being an adult in New York, and every time I revisit that movie, I'm a different age break. I watched the movie as a teenager, and then I was a 20-something, and then I was a 30-something, and now I'm a 40-something. And different parts of that movie read to me, and it's about friendship, it's about relationship, and it's about New York. And I think that movie is one of my go-to, like, if I need to relax, like it's on my phone. I bought it on Amazon years ago, and I can just play it whenever I want. So there you go.
That's a good point. There aren't a lot of love letters to New York anymore in movie
really
form.
Not.
Yeah.
They're also cynical. Like, who wants to write a love letter to New York? But my favorite New York feeling is, especially when you leave New York, because it's always good to leave New York and come back.
Yep.
But I always look forward to the cab ride from the airport going into the city, because when your cab is going over the hill and you see the skyline for the first time,
Queens, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Whether it's the daytime or the nighttime, the second you see the skyline, like my shoulders drop, and I'm like, all right, I'm home. No matter what time of day, I can go get a bagel if I want it.
Yep.
It's fine.
Order breakfast 24/7. That's all you need to know. Bagels and breakfast. All right. Where can we find you on social media?
The Jose Llana, TheJosellana on Instagram, and what is it? It's not Twitter anymore. It's X. Okay. And
my thought. Speaking of weird dictators.
Right. And Thread, I guess. Thread or
Threads.
Is it plural?
Threads.
Thread
Yeah. You post. Are you threading? When you post, are you threading? I haven't figured that out
the
yet.
best thing is that it's attached to Instagram, right? So I guess I don't know.
I like Threads right now because they don't. I don't know if it's on their roadmap to implement this, but you can't sort by or filter by hashtags, right? So if you put hashtag whatever, it's not a link like it is on Instagram. So like bots can't find you. You don't get the spammy comments. You are actually following people. So I've had some pretty meaningful stuff on Threads. I like it.
Yes, that's a good design.
Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. Well, I'm on Instagram and X. This is the first time I've had to say that. Ew, that sounded so gross.
It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel good.
I was on Twitter. Now I'm on X, Threads, Facebook. Listen and leave a review wherever you're listening. Jukebox the Ghost gave us our intro outro music. And Jose, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this chat.
Same day. Thanks so much.
Take a deep breath, make the world a little colorful.